Welcome. We'll be getting started with the roundtable in approximately 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. I see we're still in the process of logging on, but I'd like to get started with my introductory comments. Welcome to a new edition of our AUBER Roundtables, an online series featuring online presentations and discussions about regional and state economic research. My name is Patrick Barkey. I direct the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at the University of Montana, and it's been my honor to serve as president of AUBER. AUBER is the Association for University Business and Economic Research, and also to introduce this program. Established in 1947, AUBER is the premier professional organization for regional economics centers across the United States, with members from more than 75 leading universities and affiliate organizations. We support member organizations that provide communities in nearly every state with applied economic research and data that promotes informed decision-making and strengthens business environments. And we've instituted these roundtables to give you a flavor of AUBER and also to present information that we would normally be presenting at our fall conference. I invite you to visit our website, auber.org, if you'd like to get in touch with me or learn more about us. We do have another program coming up in our series of roundtables on July 23rd. We're going to hear some research presentations from a couple of economists at our member Ball State University, Srikant Devaraj and Eric Nessen will present on some information concerning COVID distancing and so forth. We invite you to log into those if you're interested. If there was ever a time when regional policies and impacts are relevant today, AUBER centers are well positioned to research and assess the challenges faced by states and regions where they operate. Today's program will highlight the nature of those challenges. Peter Evangelakis is Vice President of Economics at Regional Economic Models Incorporated, or REMI. He will moderate our program and introduce our presenters. Peter joined REMI after receiving his PhD from the University of Chicago in 2017. Based in DC, he's been involved in client support, model development, and applied research using REMI's suite of policy analysis models, and has been very active in REMI applied economic, very active in REMI-sponsored webinars on applied policy research throughout this pandemic. So I want to say welcome, Peter, and program is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Pat. Let me just start up the slides here. Actually, let me share my screen, that would help. No? And before I begin, I just want to cover a few logistical details. So the webinar will end promptly at 4 p.m. Eastern. And during the hour, I'll present first, and followed by my 3 distinguished co-panelists. And then we'll have a Q&A session. And in order to participate in the Q&A, I ask that you type your questions to everyone in the chat, which is located at the menu at the top, the bottom rather, of your Zoom window. And if you have any technical issues or questions, please also type them in the chat. I know that sometimes my audio might get a little bit garbled if my connection fades, so please feel free to chime in and let me know so that I can stop and correct things. With that, I'm going to give a short presentation and then I'll introduce my three co-panelists. So what I want to do is really set up the discussion for today. So when we're thinking about the regional impacts of COVID, I want to first step back and think about what's happening at the national level.
Say, Peter, I hate to interrupt, but your audio is cutting in and out. Is there something you can do to speak closer? Or?
Let me do the following. Let me try to call in to the meeting.
Yeah, if you could.
Unfortunately, my computer is struggling.
Yeah, maybe you can call in. That would great. That would be terrific.
Your meeting ID followed by pound. Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You are in the meeting now. There are more than 40 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing *6.
Ryan, if you could unmute the new phone number. Can everyone hear me?
Okay, excellent.
Okay, excellent.
Apologies. Everybody can hear me now?
Yeah, I think this is going to work. Go ahead, Peter.
Perfect, thank you. Apologies for the slight delay. So I want to, the topic of today's discussion is what are the regional effects of the COVID-19 crisis on the different parts of the U.S. and the different regional economies. But we really want to start looking at the national picture to kind of motivate why we also want to look at the regional. So off the top, kind of the headline numbers are that since about mid-March, there have been about almost 48 million initial unemployment insurance claims, and that's unadjusted. The adjusted number is a little bit over 51 million. And even just today, the data came out for last week, and there were still about 1.5 million. And we'll note that even though the numbers are declining week on week, there's still over 2 times the peak of the Great Recession in terms of weekly new uninsurance claims. And the 1 week lag of the continuing claims is at about 17.4 million, which are just staggering numbers. The kind of official unemployment rate now is at 11.1%, which peaked back in April at 14.7%. And there's been questions about what's the real rate. There have been questions about how some temporarily laid off workers have been measured. So certainly the real rate may be a little bit higher, but regardless, these are the highest rates since the Great Depression. So at the national level, there's been an unprecedented really amount of pain, at least in the last 100 years or so. Millions, tens of millions of people losing jobs and really facing kind of dire economic circumstances that are trickling into other parts of the economy in terms of food security, housing security, and other kind of very large-scale fundamental issues. But what we're seeing is that there is a great deal of regional variation in both the magnitude as well as the dynamics over time of the crisis, and a lot of this is going to be driven by where the spikes in terms of public health, where the spikes in COVID cases and deaths are occurring. So we saw over the last in the last week, week on week, many states, about 40% of states, reported declines in their advanced UI claims. But there are a number of states that saw very significant increases week on week, especially in the South and West, where there have been a number of COVID spikes. So we see, for example, in Florida, an almost doubling week on week of unemployment insurance claims, as well as Georgia seeing almost a third, almost a 33% increase week on week, as well as increases large increases in California and Arizona. And just even those three states, even excluding Arizona, account for more than 100% of the national increase. Kind of on net, the remaining states are seeing in aggregate a decrease in UI claims. So we can see here, especially kind of again following along with where the cases are happening, where states are having to really in a lot of cases shut back down where they're opening up. There are large increases in not only the public health consequences, but the economic consequences as well. Where Chris Christopher will introduce very shortly. We'll talk about the case of New York, where we saw at least a few days ago daily deaths go down to zero. Whereas in Florida, set the record for all states in this pandemic, with over 15,000 daily cases a few days ago. So there is a lot of heterogeneity, and in both the public health and also importantly in the types of economies. New York and Nevada and Texas and Virginia are all going to have different industry mix, and different industries are being affected in vastly different ways, as we're seeing. Another slightly more lagged indicator is this map from the Tax Foundation. This comes from late last month of the UI claims as a percentage of the civilian workforce. And so here we can see the variation state by state. So you see as low as 3.9% in South Dakota, and as high as 21% in Hawaii. There's a wide range of variation. We see, for example, in New York, also fairly high, and in Nevada, being hit. It's tourism and accommodations and gambling being hit very hard, and other states being hit much less hard. And so what I'd like to show just briefly is the many clients that REMI has have done analyses kind of across the country. So we've had our clients from New York State all the way to Southern California and everywhere in between, looking at the regional impacts. For example, our clients in Nevada, looking at the impact on accommodations and tourism, hitting them particularly hard. We have many clients in Florida who've done studies and are seeing very, very sharp impacts. And of course, in New York, in Virginia, and in Colorado, those will be the states that are looked at today. We've really been involved our clients have been involved kind of on the front lines of trying to understand the impacts of COVID for not only the nation, but their states and their regions. And I think it's important to to bring on some of those expert voices from different parts of the country to be able to speak to these regional differences. And so with that, I'd like to introduce my three co-panelists who will be speaking on several of these states. So first of all, Chris Christopher, Dr. Chris Christopher, CBE, is the chief economist at the New York State Division of the Budget since early 2019. And prior to joining the Division of Budget, Christopher was an executive director in the U.S. Macro and Global Economic Services at IHS Markit. And he's a leading member of their macro forecasting team and directed a couple of forecasting services for IHS Markit. Prior to joining IHS Markit, Christopher worked for FedEx Services in the forecasting department and chief econometrician at OIT, developing national and regional econometric models. In addition, he worked as a research economist at REMI in the 90s and in the New York State Legislative Tax Study Commission. And as an associate professor, administrator, and university lecturer in econometrics, economics, and business. He is a member of NABE. He is a certified business economist, and he did win the Consensus Economics 2013 forecast accuracy, and was a member of the team that was awarded the Klein Award for blue chip forecast accuracy in 2013 through 2016. Chris holds a BA in economics and political science and Master of Arts in economics and a PhD in economics from the University of Albany. So he'll be speaking on both the prognosis for the U.S. as well as New York State. I'm going to introduce the other speakers as well, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Our second speaker is Chris Brown, who's the Director of Policy and Research with the Common Sense Institute, where he leads the research efforts of CSI to provide insightful, accurate, and actionable information on implications of public policy issues throughout the state of Colorado. And prior to joining Common Sense Institute in September 2017, Chris spent close to a decade, again, working for REMI, where he established our DC office back in 2011 and oversaw the growth of the company in the nation's capital here. And so he's left a great legacy that I'm hoping to carry on. Since joining CSI, Chris has led several reports on a range of policy and economic issues, including potential 1% growth caps imposed on the state's major metro areas, looking at the needs for pension reform, and looking at educational issues, among others. He holds a BA in economics from UMass Amherst and an MBA from University of Colorado. He will be speaking on the prognosis for the state of Colorado. And finally, our final speaker is Dr. Terry Rephann, who's a regional economist at the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at the University of Virginia, where he has been since 2007, of course, Weldon Cooper Center being an AUBER member. I imagine many of you are familiar with his work. Much of his research focuses on the Virginia economy, including topics such as agriculture and forest, outdoor recreation, development rights, affordable housing, and others. Dr. Rephann earned his BA in economics and mathematics from Frostburg State University, and his MA and PhD in economics from West Virginia University. So again, he'll be speaking on impacts for Virginia. I'm going to turn things over now to our first speaker, Chris Christopher. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. And I will be starting to just basically present some of the issues about forecasting the national economy, and also some of the issues we are facing here in New York. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Right.
You want to put it into the slideshow mode. Bear with me for 1 second. So I think this is good. If it's all seen, I'll begin. So as I was saying, I'm going to start to begin talking about the U.S. economy and some of the problems about forecasting the U.S. economy, and of course, the New York State economy. And Peter already talked about this, but if you think of the new COVID cases and deaths for the U.S. as a whole, there are a lot of bits and pieces that are at work here. As New York was coming down, Texas, Florida, and a resurgence in California is sort of mixing with this distribution. So it's not that easy to sort of, as Peter said, it's very heterogeneous. It's not just the economy, but what COVID is doing. And recent sort of high frequency data from Homebase or Economic Tracker is suggesting there is a little bit of a pullback, especially in the South, the Southwest, and parts of California. So today at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, the retail sales report came out for the month of June. And a common theme for a lot of the data that comes out of BLS and also BEA, namely the consumer spending, the retail sales, the employment reports, they have done better than expected, especially the employment reports for May and June. And if you judge this for the retail sales report for May, was exceptionally well. It was off the chart. But there's still a big ditch. And even today, if you looked at the Bloomberg consensus from around the afternoon of Friday, it beat consensus by quite a bit. Bloomberg consensus at the end of last week for the retail sales report was around 5%, maybe a tick lower. And the numbers came out about a little bit over 7%. Okay, so what does this do? Basically, these numbers, sort of enter into the GDP calculation because they were slightly stronger than expected. And what happened was, if you looked at the GDP Now tracking systems, either at the Atlanta Fed or at IHS Markets, what basically happened was their GDP number went, basically went up now for the second quarter. How do they make these calculations? Basically, core retail sales, that's total retail sales. You take out building material and garden supply stores, you take out gasoline stations, and you take out automobile dealerships, and that's a number that goes directly into GDP. So BEA takes that number from census and puts it in their calculations, and a lot of that goes into consumer spending. Incidentally, the building material and garden supply stores retail sales number is combined with an employment number, and it's used to calculate residential investment in home improvement. In any case, the Atlanta Fed, moved up their GDP numbers, and just to get a sense of it, they're hovering around in the low negative 33% annual rate. Because of this, there's still an issue with, the economy, of course, but the numbers have been unexpectedly strong. Where the Atlanta Fed was at the end of May for the second quarter was around a little bit below negative 40%. So there has been some good news. And so I also have in the appendix of this a little bit more detailed report on the retail sales numbers. Now, another thing from the retail sales report is
those sectors that didn't do well up till in May, in April, are doing a little bit better now, and those that did very well, online or non-store, building material and garden supply stores, food and beverage stores, haven't done so well in the June report. Here you see you have the unemployment rate quarterly level for the U.S. and for New York State. These graphs are really tough, really tough with these large movements at the end, especially after February. But what you basically see here is a surge in the unemployment rate, both for New York and the United States. For the most part, these unemployment rates at the U.S. level, they're called U3. They basically hang together. But we will dive further into this. We'll dive further into this for New York State, because there's parts of New York State that are doing better than others. So what I did to sort of show the problem of forecasting, I took the blue chip consensus for GDP, and I have some more stuff in the appendix, and I just show what are the top 10, what is the average, and what is the bottom 10 average per quarter. Of course, the Q4 and Q1, the Q1 number is the third estimate. We're coming up to the annual revision for the national income and product accounts. But in any case, you can sort of see here, there's slightly a black line. That black line marker is around 2.5%, approximately. That is the average GDP growth rate and annual rate since 2016 through 2019 Q4. And you can sort of see here that just the quantum leap in volatility in the forecast compared to some kind of a moving average is just tremendous, and it's going to stay with us. It's going to stay with us, at least if you take just take the worst case scenario, take the bottom 10 average from the blue chip. This is a July blue chip published on July 10th. You can sort of see here, you don't even get close to that 2.5% until about the first part of, or latter part of 2020 and the first part of 2021. Of course, the average is much higher. And then if you think of the CBO projections for potential GDP growth, it's below 2%. So there's a long ways to go. Part of the other problem is going with the CARES Act or the UI benefits. You can sort of see here that the disposable personal income is oscillating. The forecasters have it moving all over the place. There was one-time payment. This is basically to protect consumers, to protect Americans from this downturn. But in forecasting the disposable income, which is an important ingredient in terms of forecasting consumption, there's a lot of extra work and extra calculations to sort of make. With that, I'm going to sort of go a little bit deeper on the blue chip, and I'm going to talk about something called crossover. Crossover is basically the term that sort of says, when does GDP or CPI, in this case we'll talk about GDP, surpass its previous peak. So on the bottom part of this panel, you sort of see that the GDP numbers, are here, and then you sort of look at for 2019 Q4, that was the recent peak, and then if you just take the blue chip consensus, I have a suspicion that it would sort of surpass the previous peak sometime in the first part of 2022. The blue chip doesn't go out that far. If you take the top 10 average, basically you get back to where you were in the fourth quarter of last year, in the first quarter of next year. And the bottom 10 are just they're very far below where the economy was in the last quarter of 2019. So you can also see here this panel just the range of the forecast, and this is a tremendous problem, especially if you do a bottom-up forecast. You use consumption or investment. The numbers are flying all over the place. Consumption has a little bit more oscillation in the forecast, and in actually the numbers that we're sort of seeing recently than overall GDP. With that, I'm going to sort of move over into the New York State economy. And basically, this is just a map, and you can sort of notice here that you have New York City is sort of the moneymaker. This is a median household income. The area surrounding New York City is a little bit better, and most of the rest of the state doesn't have a high income. And this is a chart, a table we constructed off the QCEW data, and the portfolio of New York State industry composition is basically heavily weighted toward the financial activities. About 20% of the state's wages come from the financial sector. Now, the financial sector has its problems, but at least the equity markets have been holding up pretty well, and in some cases within striking ranges of its February peak, if you look at Dow Jones or S&P. All right, so this is sort of the difference between what the U.S. is experiencing and what New York State is experiencing. Now, there is a very strong difference of what's happening in New York. If you sort of see here, the New York State economy is basically driven to a large degree by New York City. Now, the New York City unemployment rate went up last report. By the way, the state numbers are coming out from New York State Department of Labor today sometime. I don't have them in here for the month of June. And the rest of the state fell, okay? So New York City being the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, at least in the United States, has a long way to go. And there's some other concerns we have here. This is, we devised from the CES data, New York City, rest of downstate and upstate. And the one with the red dots is New York City, and you can sort of see that its growth rate, this is a year-over-year growth rate, and it is seasonally adjusted. You can sort of notice here that New York City was doing much better than the rest of the states, and upstate basically trying to hold on. And just at the end of last year, was actually going into negative territory on a year-over-year basis. So the concern from the New York State point of view is how New York City will handle, let's say the pandemic and the reopening. It could cause a lot of stress, not only to the state government, but also to the overall economy of New York. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris Brown, who's going to talk about the Colorado economy.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Let me pull up my slides here. Okay, thank you. And Peter or Chris, you have to jump in and let me know if audio or slides are not working. But thank you so much. And thanks to Pat and Peter for the opportunity to talk to this group today. My name is Chris Brown. I'm the Director of Policy and Research here at the Common Sense Institute. We are a public policy research organization that focuses on economic and public policy issues here in Colorado. Really, our focus is on releasing research, releasing information to the public, and engaging with the business community and lawmakers regarding our research and regarding ultimately fostering an environment for sustained economic prosperity here. The Colorado story as it relates to COVID-19 is obviously very similar to many other states. And, we had, experienced the worst month, I think, in, states recorded history in terms of job loss, seeing a reduction in over 11% of all jobs in April, or a reduction over nearly 330,000 jobs, quickly followed by one of the most one of the, quote unquote, best months for job growth, adding roughly a full year, an amount equivalent to the job growth in 2019 in May. But at the end of the day, that was only 20% of the jobs that were lost over the previous 30 to 45 days. When we look at how Colorado is faring relative to the national average, at a high level, the Colorado unemployment rate for May, again, as Chris indicated, we're awaiting the updated state employment numbers as well to be released here very, imminently. As of May, the Colorado unemployment rate stood at 10.2%, roughly 3% below the national average. And if we look at a comparison between the change in employment from February, so pre-pandemic, through May, we can get a sense of how different Colorado sectors have fared. And again, I'm running through these slides in a way that may inspire you in your local communities and local states and regions to look at for yourself. But two interesting findings that have stood out to us are two fairly labor-intensive sectors that contribute quite a large number of jobs to the Colorado economy include professional business services and construction, both of which fared quite a bit better than the national average in many ways. If we look again, just in terms of the percentage change in jobs from pre-pandemic to May, I think that a lot of this still requires more digging into some of the subsector detail, but for something like professional services, I think it might reflect a different mix of businesses and jobs here in Colorado, particularly on the Front Range, that are part of this sector that we're able to continue to operate and retain employment. However, I think when we look at construction and how construction has fared relatively better than the national average and has over the last several months, I think in many ways it may be driven by actually policy responses in terms of how the various shutdown orders or stay-at-home orders, as they were called here in Colorado, exempted various industries, including large portions of construction, which I know was quite different than the way some of the Northeast states reacted and impacted construction. So some of what we're seeing in these regional differences, I think, relates to the industry composition and the nature of jobs here, but I think it also reflects some of the policy mechanisms that have come through, again, over the last couple months. Again, as an organization, we respond to a lot of the research that's coming out. We are not responsible for producing the forecasts here. The official state forecasts are led by the Colorado Legislative Council staff, our nonpartisan staff agency that works on behalf of the legislature, along with the governor's budget office. So I've looked at I've laid out the last 4 economic forecasts as it relates to employment growth rates on an annual basis. And it's incredible just to look at the volatility that we've seen in just the forecasts that have come out in the last 3 months and when compared to pre-pandemic. So the last forecast to come out before rumblings of severe economic impacts here in Colorado and across the nation occurred in December, and was projecting sustained positive job growth of a little over 1%, slight downward trend was sort of the consensus at that point. Just prior to some of the most impactful public policies and a real reaction to growing cases here in the States, the Legislative Council had the unfortunate task of releasing their quarterly forecast in mid-March, and indicated a slight revision downward, but we're not nearly as did not reflect near the amount of information that came about just within the next few weeks, frankly, that they then updated for an interim forecast ahead of the restart of our legislative session that then was updated in June to where we are now in terms of our latest outlook. But the volatility here is just incredible when you consider how most quarterly forecasts change, or frankly, don't change. So I guess one element that I'd like to discuss as part of this, aside from economics, you heard from Chris, you'll hear from Terry, both tremendous regional economists that have a lot to say. I think one element I wanted to focus on were the ramifications for budgets, particularly state budgets, is a big emphasis of what we focus on. And again, in December, we were looking at historic growth, and this is just our general fund revenue, but historic growth in revenue, which was revised downward slightly in early March, and then again reflected more recent data in May, and then has information unfolded sort of between some of the most extreme shutdown orders and some of the letting up of shutdown orders. The most recent forecast in June indicates a rebound in revenue, not in fiscal year 2022, but sustained downward trend to the point where, again, even through the forecast, we do not return to projected levels or revenue levels that we saw in fiscal year 19, let alone where the projections were just 4 months ago. So that's the near term. The longer term outlook and just ideas that I'd like to instill as part of this conversation, issues that we are tracking pretty closely, again, from a regional impact standpoint that impacts both the economics and the state's budget, are the pressures that this downturn will put on the long-term outlook for the budget that are not currently accounted for in these forecasts, which include Medicaid case enrollment, potential impacts and long-term impacts to our state pension contributions, which ultimately sort of crowd out other spending priorities. But as Chris mentioned, at the moment, equity markets seem to be holding, so maybe, I'm not going to say quite silver lining, but maybe an issue which will not pose as significant long-term financial strain on state and local budgets, but something to be very concerned with nonetheless. The third being unemployment insurance. So here in Colorado, if we take a quick snapshot of Medicaid case enrollment, direct you to the dark blue line up top and the red line here. The dark blue line is Medicaid case enrollment on a monthly basis, tracking back to prior to 2010. And even as we saw a drop in unemployment rates through February, we saw Medicaid case enrollment continue to remain very high. And that had, sustained and very large impacts on our state budget through the last decade. And now that we have seen, again, sharp increases in our unemployment rate, just in the last several months, we've actually seen a pretty sharp uptick in case enrollment. Where this trends with the reopening and the hopeful recovery of jobs is unclear. However, this is, again, should be a large consideration for any budget and economic outlook. The information that we've been tracking, on a weekly basis, like everyone else, is related to unemployment insurance claims. The forecast for Colorado is that the unemployment insurance trust fund that pays out the state's share of these benefits will run out somewhere at the end of, or if it hasn't already, I actually haven't heard a revision. In June, it was supposedly supposed to run out in early July. So about now, which will mean the state will incur large loans for recovery, which ultimately will have to be repaid through businesses' contributions back into the trust fund, and will come as a cost of business in the long term, which I think should be a large consideration for both policymakers and anyone looking at the long-term outlook, because those costs could be quite significant, again, barring federal policy, barring federal intervention here. So we ran a scenario in early March, and I guess where I'd just like to leave the discussion is we know there are severe short-term and very uncertain short-term outlooks that ultimately will impact the trajectory of our state budget and any state budget for years to come. And I guess the quicker the economy can rebound, the quicker policy can reflect where outbreaks are occurring and be more responsive to both the public health threats and the economic realities that are caused by the public health and executive orders, the quicker the economy can rebound. So we ran a scenario, and just for some insight here, we ran a scenario in early March as this crisis was unfolding that looked at very severe downturns in economic growth for 4 key sectors that we expected to be the most severely impacted: in restaurants, our ski resorts, other retail, food services, and a 50% reduction in business for a full quarter here in Colorado amounted to about 183,000 total jobs lost, or about 5%, nearly 5% of all jobs. The interesting finding of that was that 2/3 of the job loss, as we ran it through the macro model, were in the 4 industries directly impacted. So as we look to recover, I think an insight for more targeted policy response would be that as you look to the economic recovery, particularly in bringing jobs back, a way to look at these numbers would be for every 2 jobs that return in these 4 sectors, essentially we bring back maybe a 3rd job. And so we can see the connection between the direct impacts in industries that have been unable to operate and the rest of the economy. And this will be a main area for us as we focus on the 2021 session and any public policy coming forward through the fall, is taking a look at the isolated economic impact. So where I guess I'll leave it here, and I've gone a little over my time, I apologize, but one issue we've been tracking again is not just looking at the state economy, but frankly trying to understand the impacts at a sub-state level to the extent possible, because both in helping to frame where policy can be more targeted at a sub-state level and addressing where outbreaks are actually occurring, but also recognizing the sort of economic damage that occurs with these statewide orders when maybe the threat of public health is not as significant in every part of the state. So this is a chart that shows the change in unemployment relative to the number of cases as a share of total population relative to a national average. And we can see that even when we look at a sub-state level, there is a wide range of both economic shock and public health risks. Up in the higher quadrant here, where we saw very severe economic downturns and high unemployment, is in a lot of our mountain communities where we have our ski resorts and a lot of seasonal work. And then we have here on the left side, relatively lower number of cases, but relatively high unemployment. And so again, I just think there's more insight in the information we have today that can guide policy going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Terry and take questions at the end. Thank you. So Terry Rephann, you're up.
Hello, everybody. My name's Terry Rephann. I'm a regional economist at UVA. I think I probably met a lot of you at Savannah at our last conference. But if not, greetings. And In the background is the rotunda of Thomas Jefferson, who is now a hated and reviled figure in some places. If you're offended, I apologize, but that is still a background that UVA recommends. So a little bit about the study that we did about the same time frame as Chris Brown's REMI study. And I wanted to dwell a little bit on the methodology in an abbreviated way, and also tell you how we might revise it if we did it again, and how it held up as of July right now, and in some ways not so well. And what we fed into the model were a national macroeconomic forecast, and we sort of crowdsourced it like Chris Christopher did with his blue chip, alluding to the blue chip forecast. And then we used some information on industry exposure from a CBO study that was published way back in 2005, and they based some of their industry exposure factors on what went on in Asia back before that time with regard to one of the earlier flu pandemics there. And one of the main purposes for doing this was to get some economic and revenue impacts out there, because there was just a total lack of information, people running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And so, you know, we want to say, slow down, you know, this seems a manageable problem. These are some forecasts what the revenue impacts would be for the state and localities. Technical details on this are available. I did an earlier version of this at a REMI webinar back in early May. And so there's a slideshow and references available there if you're interested. So we use national GDP forecast. We adjusted that forecast to take into consideration the disparate impacts by industry. And so we used information that was available back in March, and you know there's a lot more information available now, but we didn't have access to that, obviously. Macro forecast, what do we know now? Well, now the general consensus, I think, is that GDP on an annual basis will be down 48%. That's where most of the folks are. Wall Street Journal Economic Forecasting Survey, this graph shows that it's sort of stabilizing. It was deteriorating through May, and now it seems to be around 5.5%. Also, the survey of professional forecasters, the Philadelphia Fed, about 5.5%. Two AUBER members, Rajiv and John, are members of, I would think, both those groups. Rajiv presented an earlier AUBER webinar, is way down there. He's in negative double digits. He's very pessimistic. And Sean is maybe a little bit above the consensus forecast, somewhere in a range of -4%. What we used at the time, we like things that are free. So RSQE, they publish their forecast right now through the pandemic. Wells Fargo, John Sylvia has been a presenter at several AUBER conferences, and they have a great website where they give information on economic indicators. It's all free. IHS Market, well, that's a paywall, but that's easy to get from state agencies here. So we used those three sort of benchmark at the time and developed a couple of scenarios, -2, -6%, and 220, and then reversion back, a bounce back, and then reversion back to a 2% growth rate. Now, since that time, there's deterioration. Looks more like this now. If we were to do it over again, we'd change a bound of 4 to 8% probably. The average of these three forecasting units about -6%. So the other piece of information, in addition to those national growth assumptions, is we use these CBO exposure factors. And CBO at that time estimated about the effect of a pandemic similar to the Asian flu, which was very much a V-shaped economic growth path. They estimated about 4.5% negative GDP growth, real GDP growth. They used these factors. As you look down there by industry, some of them are quite plausible based on our recent experience. The services sectors, the one that we now know is quite different is healthcare, because a lot of the ambulatory, the outpatient care basically shut down because people were not going in for either routine care or elective care. So after we put all this information in the REMI model, these are the impacts we got in terms of employment and GDP. And because a lot of the sectors most hardly, the sectors that were hit the hardest tend to be lower paid jobs, lower value added, the employment impact is significantly higher than the GDP impact. Now, when we fast forward to what has actually happened to date, this is an annual figure on average, an annual average relative. It's 503 is an economic impact, but the state was projected to grow at about 50, 60,000 jobs. So the real year-to-year change is minus 450,000 jobs. May to May, it's about 370,000. Calendar year average 2019 to May 2020, it's about 380,000 loss. So, this modeling exercise in the negative 6% scenario is showing worse impact than what has actually occurred to date. We also generated some revenue estimates for both the state and localities using an old REMI methodology. We don't have the tax PI model, so we did it a spreadsheet version using Census of Government data. We also used an ad hoc method using some Virginia data on local revenues. It's fairly fine-grained. And what we came up after using that methodology is an estimate that the state would be much more severely impacted than the localities. And of course, the localities depend on property tax, and real property, real estate tax is a lion's share of the revenues. And right now it doesn't look like, at least in the foreseeable future, that's going to be severely negatively impacted. The portion that would be the commercial real estate market. So we estimated in terms of general fund revenue impact about minus 8.5%. Virginia Department of Finance current estimate is more on the range of minus 5%. So what we're seeing is, with this sort of quick and dirty exercise that we did just to get some numbers out there to say, hey, calm down, folks. This is a manageable problem. It's actually turning out to be a little bit more manageable than what even our negative scenario portrayed. So that's what I had to show you here. And at this point, I'll turn it back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Terry, and thank you to Chris Christopher and Chris Brown for some very insightful presentations. I think given where we are, we're about 3 minutes until the top of the hour. I think unfortunately won't have time for Q&A this time around, but certainly feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to discuss these issues further. So if there's any interest, that would be very welcome. So I want to thank also Pat Parkey. I want to thank Brian Lewandowski for coordinating everything, and Shannon Furness for doing a great job coordinating. The AUBER team is, as expected, excellent. It's always a pleasure working with them. I hope that this presentation was interesting. I know it's being recorded, so if there's anything you want to take a look at, I think that you can speak with the AUBER folks about how to get your hands on that. So with that, I think we can adjourn. Thank you very much.